A man locks the airplane lavatory and skillfully seals the smoke detector with pre-prepared tape. He takes out a cigarette and a handgun from his pocket. He started to leisurely enjoy his happiness. After completing his actions, he nonchalantly returns to his seat, thinking he went unnoticed. However, to his surprise, someone has discovered his activities. Suddenly, his phone receives an anonymous message. Bill tries to inquire about the sender's identity, but the mysterious person only claims to be a passenger. Thinking it might be a prank, Bill warns that hacking into the internal network is illegal. Yet, the mysterious person sends another message, stating that smoking in the restroom is also a crime. Bill is dumbfounded in an instant. There couldn't possibly be surveillance cameras inside the lavatory, and his covert operation seemed foolproof. How could he have been exposed? He looks at the sleeping beauty next to him and observes the other passengers, but nothing seems out of the ordinary. His instincts tell him that things might not be as simple as they appear. He begins to observe the passengers in the cabin closely, but at that moment, his phone rings again, informing him that a random person on the plane will be killed every 20 minutes. Otherwise, give him $155 million. Immediately an account number was sent. Bill scrutinized every passenger on the plane, but almost everyone was asleep at this hour. Although he believed it was a prank, he still set a 20-minute countdown. He found another air marshal on board and interrogated him about why he would play such a joke. Because the plane's network was encrypted, he suspected it was a malicious act by a colleague, but the man looked bewildered and had no knowledge of any text messages. To prove his innocence, he decisively took out his own phone. However, the contents were all work-related discussions, indicating that the situation was not as simple as he had imagined. Bill believed the plane should land immediately, but his colleague thought it was all nonsense. If there was a genuine threat, he would support Bill's opinion, but causing the plane to turn back over a few playful text messages seemed like an overreaction. Then his colleague added, "Even if this situation were real, how could the mysterious person escape after killing someone? After all, they were at an altitude of 30,000 feet. In order to be safe, Bill reported the incident to the captain. However, the plane was currently over the Pacific Ocean, and the nearest airport was still an hour and a half away. The captain relayed the situation to the ground and requested assistance in investigating the information of all passengers. With less than 10 minutes remaining, Bill decided to expose the mysterious person. He displayed his badge and asked his seatmate, Jen, for help. Then he found the flight attendant, who happened to be his best friend. Since Jen had been with him the whole time, she could be ruled out as a suspect. At this point, Bill only trusted the two of them on the entire plane. He took out a pencil and said that he would send a message shortly. Their task was to monitor and mark anyone using their phone. Although both of them were puzzled, they kept their eyes glued to the monitor. Soon, Bill sent a message to the mysterious person, while observing every passenger in their seats. Jen was also quick-eyed and immediately identified the target using a phone. Bill continued his attempts to communicate with the person, trying to buy more time for the two girls. They frantically marked targets on the monitor, but to their surprise, their colleague turned out to be the most frequent user. At that moment, the man suddenly stood up and headed towards the lavatory. Bill followed him inside and tried to snatch the man's phone, but his colleague was quicker and took the upper hand. Despite both being air marshals, the man showed considerable weakness. After a brief struggle, Bill subdued him, but his colleague reached for a weapon. In desperation, Bill swiftly snapped his colleague's neck. Nervously, he exited the lavatory and promptly locked the door. It was at that moment that his phone rang again. The person on the other end claimed that if they didn't see the money soon, another person would die in 20 minutes. Only then did Bill realize that he had become a pawn in the hands of the mysterious person. It seemed that the mysterious person had significant influence. Bill set the alarm once again, and just then, his phone received another message. They threatened that if the ransom wasn't paid, more and more people would die because of him. Bill, in a state of panic, approached the captain and asked about the progress of the ground investigation. However, the captain informed him that none of the individuals had a criminal record, and the account number Bill provided was suspicious because it was traced back to Bill himself.
What? TSA just confirmed it.
That doesn't make any sense. You know me. You know I never do.
I know.
Despite years of working together, the captain, for safety reasons, confiscated Bill's firearm and badge. The captain reassured Bill not to worry and believed it was all a prank from the other party. After all, the time had passed, and no passengers were found to be harmed. Bill became even more nervous, as he realized that if the captain discovered he had killed his colleague, he would become the scapegoat. However, in his colleague's phone, Bill discovered that his colleague had been using his position to engage in illegal smuggling. The mysterious person had found out about this and used it as leverage, making Bill paranoid and suspicious of everyone. This ultimately led to Bill's misjudgment and the accidental killing of his colleague. He took his colleague's gun and swore to find the real culprit, but as soon as he left the lavatory, he coincidentally ran into his friend. He quickly covered her mouth, claiming that he had been framed, and truthfully explained the situation to her. Bill hoped his friend would give him some time, or else another person would die in 13 minutes. He then asked his friend to utilize their positions to conduct a search of each passenger. However, this rough behavior caused discontent among all the passengers, and someone pulled out their phone and posted about it online. At that moment, Bill noticed a passenger wearing glasses. They had greeted each other before boarding, and the passenger had claimed to be heading to France. However, now they were on a plane bound for England. It seemed that Tom was the prime suspect. Bill dragged him to the service area, preparing to interrogate him, but just as he was about to question Tom, his phone rang once again.
You're wasting time.
Marks, Agent Marks, you are hereby relieved of duty. Do you hear me?
In 3 minutes, someone on this plane is gonna die. Do you hear me?
Bowen is clean, Bill. He's a school teacher, for Christ's sake. He has family in London. Everyone on that flight is clean. Everyone except you.
Bill refused to acknowledge any of it and demanded to know why Tom had lied. However, Tom had no idea that Bill was an air marshal. He simply mentioned that someone had given him $100 to strike up a conversation with Bill and inquire about his intended destination. Bill pressed Tom for more information, but despite searching the area, there was no sign of the mysterious person within the given time limit. Could it be that the person could really manipulate him into killing again? Nervously, Bill pulled out his gun, leaving everyone stunned by his actions, and just then, his phone rang once more, with the person on the other end arrogantly stating that their targets were not limited to just the passengers. Bill instantly panicked and rushed towards the cockpit. However, he was too late. The captain was already unconscious, foaming at the mouth. He found a doctor among the passengers who determined that the captain had been poisoned, but no one could enter the cockpit from the outside, and the co-pilot confirmed that they hadn't eaten anything either. Could the man in front of him be the culprit? Bill didn't dare to speculate. If that were the case, everyone would become his hostage. With no other options, Bill, being the only one who could fly the plane, reluctantly trusted the co-pilot as a good person. He immediately called headquarters and reported the situation, explaining everything in detail. He also requested that they transfer the money to the designated account quickly. However, his request was rejected by the company. Bill set the timer once again. It seemed that he not only had to prove his innocence but also needed to find the mysterious person as soon as possible. Jen found Bill, and during their conversation, she discovered that Zach was a mobile programmer. Zach mentioned that he could design a simple Trojan horse that, once the recipient received the message, would change their phone from silent mode to ringing mode. It seemed like this was the only option now. Bill handed his phone to Zach. In order to better observe everyone, he gathered all the passengers together, but this was met with opposition from everyone. To maintain control of the situation, Bill had to make promises he couldn't necessarily keep.
Free flights! Free travel! The airline company will guarantee 1 year's international free travel. If you sit down, remain quiet, and do what I say. Free international travel.
Unexpectedly, this tactic worked. Although some people didn't believe in his words, the passengers obediently raised their hands. Even his most trusted friend had no choice but to comply. Soon, Zach managed to create the virus, and Bill sent the message from his phone. Anxiously gripping his gun, Bill waited, and in the next second, the phone indeed started ringing. Following the sound, he approached a man in a suit who appeared bewildered, although the man claimed that it wasn't his phone. No matter how he explained himself, Bill persisted in his judgment. He took the man out of the cabin, preparing to use harsh methods to extract information, but suddenly, the man began to struggle to breathe, and then he foamed at the mouth and passed away. His death was identical to that of the captain. At that moment, the 20-minute timer also went off. After a medical examination, it was determined that both individuals had died from poisoning. Bill locked himself in the restroom, facing a difficult dilemma. However, while he was smoking, he noticed that the smoke was being drawn into the tissue box. Intrigued by this bizarre sight, Bill opened it up to investigate. To his surprise, there was a small hole in the back plate, providing a clear view of the cockpit. Bill then checked the trash can and discovered 2 steel pipes inside. After assembling them, he realized it was a legendary hidden weapon. Once again, He looked through the small hole, and at that moment, everything became clear to him. Soon, he found a mini needle on the man in the suit, indicating that this was how the two victims were killed. He then approached an elderly person near the restroom and learned from them that only the redhead woman sitting next to them had entered the restroom. Bill was dumbfounded because the woman had initially not been sitting next to him. She had voluntarily switched seats with Zach. Bill took out the needle. He finally started suspecting Jen, from her proactive approach to him, to getting Zach to implant the Trojan horse. It seemed like she was overly enthusiastic. However, when faced with Bill's suspicion, Jen denied everything. She claimed that she had undergone surgery but had limited time left, so she simply wanted to sit by the window and enjoy the beauty of the world. Bill approached the co-pilot again and confirmed Jen's medical condition with the ground staff. It seemed that the only option now was to start with the phone left by the mysterious person. However, despite several attempts, Bill couldn't crack the password. Unexpectedly, Jen entered the password once, and the phone unlocked, but suddenly, a series of numbers appeared on the screen, as if triggering some device. As Bill looked at the 30-minute countdown, unease crept into his heart once again. He suspected that there was a bomb on the plane, but they had searched everywhere and found no traces of a bomb. Jen even started doubting his judgment, questioning how an ordinary person could bring a bomb on board under strict security checks. Her words reminded Bill of something. He returned to the restroom, opened his colleague's carry-on bag. As internal staff, they were not subjected to thorough inspections. Sure enough, beneath the white powder, there was a hidden bomb. However, as Bill stepped out of the restroom, he was suddenly attacked. A group of people swarmed him. Despite his professional training, with more and more passengers joining in, Bill was eventually overpowered. Not long ago, news reached the plane that the airline officially labeled Bill as a dangerous individual, accusing him of hijacking a flight. At that moment, a passenger picked up a handgun, causing panic among everyone.
I want you to tell me what the hell's going on.
Relax.
Don't tell me to relax.
Passenger on board this flight has threatened to kill someone every 20 minutes, unless they're paid $150 million. And now, 3 people are dead.
Through a sincere speech, Bill managed to make everyone believe in him, and even the bald sheriff voluntarily came forward to help. However, they lacked the means to defuse the bomb, so their only option was to minimize its explosive power. Bill handed over the handgun to the passenger and informed the co-pilot about the bomb. With only 16 minutes left, they had to lower the aircraft's altitude to below 8,000 meters to minimize the potential damage. However, the man hesitated because 2 friends had joined them, demanding to land at a designated airport in 10 minutes. Bill had no choice but to intervene. He placed the bomb near the security door. Meanwhile, others started moving luggage, attempting to create a barrier. At that moment, the airline called, claiming they had successfully transferred the requested amount and hoped that Bill would ensure the safety of the hostages. Bill wanted to explain, but the other party mentioned that his gun-wielding hijacking video had already been posted online. It was then that Bill noticed a man among the passengers holding a cell phone. He seemed to have an idea and forced the man to hand over his phone. Unexpectedly, the man had already recorded multiple videos, including the segment where he was mistaken for a robber. However, upon closer inspection, when he bumped into Tom, he noticed that he had just made contact with the man in the suit. In that moment of collision, it seemed like something fell onto the man. After carefully reviewing the footage multiple times, Bill became certain that something was off about Tom. At that moment, the man also seemed to sense the abnormality. He suddenly hijacked the bald sheriff and snatched his weapon. However, Bill showed no signs of fear or concern for the bald sheriff's life. He remained unfazed. Tom was momentarily taken aback by the situation, but to his surprise, when he pulled the trigger, he realized there were no bullets in the gun. Using this momentary distraction, the bald sheriff managed to reclaim his weapon, but Tom escaped. Bill instructed the bald sheriff to search the overhead luggage compartments for the controller while he continued his pursuit of Tom. However, in an unexpected turn, Zach suddenly made a move and seized the bald sheriff's weapon. He loaded the magazine he had picked up and aimed it at the bald sheriff, preparing to shoot. At the same time, Tom launched a surprise attack and managed to grab Bill's pistol. It was then revealed that the two of them were actually working together, and Zach had hacked into the plane's internal network.
You're my hero. People everywhere are gonna remember the name Bill Marks. An alcoholic, self-destructive, suicidal man with a gun and a federal badge who changed everything.
What do you think, dude? This is gonna change.
2 minutes outside the window. Suit up.
Unexpectedly, The two had already planned their escape route. It turned out that Tom's father had died in a terrorist attack, causing him to lose faith in the country. He was willing to create this highly publicized scenario as a reminder to the entire nation. However, Zach, not willing to risk his life for money, disagreed with his partner's intentions. Their differences started to emerge, but before they could resolve them, Tom shot Zach. Meanwhile, the co-pilot suddenly lowered the altitude, causing Tom to be thrown off balance and ejected from the plane. However, the bullet shattered the glass, causing an instant decompression in the cabin. Taking advantage of the situation, Bill picked up the dropped handgun and swiftly eliminated the hijacker without hesitation. Just when they thought the crisis was over, a loud explosion echoed through the cabin. The bomb had blown a large hole in the tail of the plane, but fortunately, the co-pilot managed to regain control. They successfully made an emergency landing, but the intense friction caused the plane to disintegrate. Finally, just as it was about to go off the end of the runway, it came to a stop, bringing an end to the crisis. The ordeal was finally over today.